I've seen that in patch 1.6 the Dark Zone will be getting a lot of additions. We will get leaderboards with row kills, looted chests, extracted items, and overall the developers are looking to make the Dark Zone a more competitive, more intense, and a more rewarding experience. Now, I may not be joining the second wave of the ETF to help and work out on the PvP aspects of the game, but that isn't going to stop me from talking about the things that I believe should at least be looked at, besides just adding a couple of new and cool features. Because let's face it, the PvP at its core is pretty broken right now. Build diversity is minimal, a lot of the skills are considered useless or cheesy, and most of the fights come down to hipfire battles that couldn't be further away from what a cover-based shooter is supposed to look like. So instead of talking about Dark Zone specific problems with this video, such as the lack of risk versus reward as soon as players are geared out, I wanted to look at the game as a whole. The gear sets, the main stats, the stat rolls, the different weapons, the different items, all those things. Because I believe that if we balance out the game at its core, the PvP experience will improve a lot with it. With or without the implementation of leaderboards and such things. So what I kind of want to do is go over a few of the most important general topics, starting off today with main stat scaling and stat rolls on gear. Then, if this is something that most people watching this video want me to continue with, I can talk about player and build identification. I can also talk about the skills and the talents, I can talk about crowd control buffs and counterplay, and then maybe, finally, after all the core issues are addressed and engaging in PvP should no longer look like a clown fiesta, then I can maybe talk about how we can add the risk factor back to engaging in PvP when you're already geared out. The plan is to address each and every one of these issues with their proposed solutions in their own videos. This is not to create more videos and generate more clicks on my YouTube channel. I mean, if I wanted to do that, there are much easier ways to go about that, such as weekly vendor reset videos or Dark Zone montages. No, but I actually tried to put everything I had to say into one video. However, the video would either end up being close to an hour long, or I would have to be forced to not go into details whatsoever, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of a video like this. So for these reasons, I am forced to kind of split up the content this way. As I said, for today, in this video, I will start off with the most important one that I have on my list, and that is the main stat scaling and the gear stat rolls. When I'm talking about main stats, I'm talking about the three stats that pretty much define how powerful your character is. I'm talking about your DPS, your toughness, and your skill power. And while you'd like to hear it or not, I believe that each and every one of these three main stats, they have some severe scaling problems that will only get worse and worse as we get further into the game's lifespan. I'll start off with the toughness, as I believe that most people are pretty familiar with what exactly is wrong with this. A player's toughness is determined by two factors, his total amount of health and his damage mitigation. For example, a player with 100,000 health and 50% damage mitigation will have a toughness of 200,000. That is because, of course, 50% of all that incoming damage is mitigated, and thus the 100,000 HP is essentially twice as valuable. The problem with this scaling is that the closer that you get to 100% damage mitigation, the more and more your toughness will exponentially grow. With 100,000 health and 75% damage mitigation, you're already looking at 400,000 toughness. So as you can see right here, you need a smaller and smaller amount of increase in damage mitigation to increase your character's survivability by more and more. The scaling problem is so severe that the developers had to use a different armor calculation for each world tier, because otherwise players in world tier 5 would be near invulnerable, or the players in world tier 1 would be too squishy. That is why the toughness jumps up and down when you're switching world tiers. This problem is also the reason why players are pretty much always forced to roll armor on their gear. As long as it's a possible roll, of course. That means you have to roll it on the chest piece, the backpack, the holster, the knee pads, and then also on every single gear mod on the game, which absolutely destroys any build diversity and actually makes the RNG in this game a lot more harsh than it's supposed to be. Because if a gear piece does not have armor, if it doesn't have a high amount of armor, it is an instant deconstruct or sell. This very problem with armor, it has been around for a while. It has been around ever since the game was released. And my proposed solution is still the same as it was when I talked about changing it in a 1.4 update. I wanted to not translate the armor into points of damage mitigation, but instead give players an armor bar that is additive on top of a player's health bar, so that the total amount of toughness is health plus armor and not health multiplied with a certain armor percentage. However, when I was over in Sweden, the developers have actually told me that there would simply not be enough time to implement such a feature, and it would have to go through a lot of testing before even the first version would make it to the PTS. Now, I understand this. I understand that time is always an issue and not something that's always available. So for this video, I didn't want to reiterate the same solution. I actually wanted to propose a second solution, which might not be as good as having a dedicated armor bar, but it would definitely be a lot faster and a lot easier to implement. Something that would be doable for the 1.6 patch. The solution is to simply remove armor as a possible role on gear. In this case, gear items would still always have a native armor role on them, and between what ranges of damage mitigation this should give the player is ultimately up to the developers, but without armor available as a possible role, it would at the very least open up a lot of other options on gear and ultimately make the game a lot more fun. The way that you could implement this is by simply taking the 2 armor values on, for example, the chest piece, and with the 2 armor values I'm talking about the native armor and the additional armor that you can roll extra on it, and have the minimum and maximum of both of those combined as the native armor, giving the player 2 other options to roll something as a major stat that is not armor. This would be more of a short-term solution, as damage mitigation would still be in place, but again, it would be more than doable for the 1.6 update, which is the point here. The second main set that I wanted to talk about is skill power. With the 1.4 patch, the scaling of skill power has been adjusted to scale fairly linear up to 250,000 skill power, after which diminishing returns will start to kick in very heavily. The change from linear scaling to something with diminishing returns was made so that hard caps could be removed from the skills, and although that was definitely an improvement, it is still far from perfect. The first of its problems already started to show when the 1.5 patch dropped and we got another gear score increase for our characters. With the higher gear score items, every player gets more and more skill power, which means a couple of things. It first up means that everyone's heals get stronger, the cooldowns of the skills get shorter, and the players that actually want to spec into skill power will find that they hit that soft cap of 250,000 a lot sooner relatively. They do not have to commit as much into skill power to reach it. As an example, we can take my healer build, which isn't even using the extra skill power from the Tactician's 3-piece or the Tactician's 4-piece, so it could be a lot higher. It currently is sitting at 208,000 skill power, which is more than enough because I'm able to achieve a 6-second cooldown on my heals and still have 400k toughness with that, making it relatively challenging to kill me. Now, does that remind you of anything? The Tactician? Yes, the Tactician. If patch 1.6 maintains the same skill power scaling curve as right now, players will be able to hit the soft cap for skill power while still running around with a toughness of around 500,000, basically making them a tank and a healer at the same time, or a tank and someone with a very powerful sticky bomb. In both cases, it is someone that simply doesn't die. That's why I was referring to the Tacticians. However, that is not the only problem, because if the soft cap for the skill power stays the same way as that it is right now, that means that dedicated healers or skill power builds will be less and less effective. Because while the health and the damage of every single player increases by quite a large margin, the heals and the power of the other skills are locked behind that diminishing returns wall, which creates the exact same problem as to why we removed the hard caps from the skills in the first place. Now, you might say that an easy solution for this is to simply change the skill power scaling curve per role tier. So that, for example, the diminishing returns in role tier 4, they only kick in at 250,000. But then in World Tier 5 they start at 300,000, so that relatively players can still spec the same amount into skill power on their characters and get relatively the same amount of value. But the problem that occurs with this is when geared players go back to a lower role tier. Because in these lower role tiers the diminishing returns start to kick in very soon, their heals, their shields and their turrets and all those things, they will not do jack for them because all their power has been cut off a lot sooner. What in my eyes is the only long-term solution to fix skill power is to not have any diminishing returns at all and to not have any caps at all. That means linear scaling that goes all the way to infinity. This may sound like it will break the game, and it will, if it were to be all by itself, but this is only one part of the solution. Of course, if we do not have diminishing returns and we have linear scaling and leave the game the way that it is right now, the one-shot sticky bombers and the flame turret cheesers would be the only thing left in the Dark Zone. So in order to not destroy the whole DZ experience, Some additional adjustments have to be made to the skills in order to make this work. The very first one on that list is that the cooldown of a skill is not affected by skill power, meaning that you can have as much skill power as you want, but a 40-second heal will always stay a 40-second heal no matter how much skill power you keep pushing. This way, from world tier to world tier, and from gear score to gear score, a heal will always be equally powerful if players spec the same amount of their main stats into skill power. Assuming of course that the heal scales at the same rate as the average player's health. Now, does this mean that we will never be able to reduce our cooldowns anymore at all? Of course not, that would be very stupid. The cooldowns of skills should still have the possibility of being reduced, but not through skill power. Instead, what we really should be doing is use skill haste for this. Skill haste is a stat that has been in the game since launch, but it has always been ignored. It was never really chosen, simply because it was never worth picking it up. Skill power already did the same thing, and it did it better, so why go with skill haste in the first place? But here's the thing, with armor no longer being a possible roll on gear, assuming that the change to armor rolls on gear goes through, players can now actually choose to spec into skill haste on their gear, if you want to go for a healer build for example, up to a total of around 35 to 40%, turning that 40-second cooldown of your heal into a 24-second cooldown on the heal. Just to take a super quick example. And to be honest, if this were to be the way that it worked, myself, as a healer build, I would pick this one up. But of course the heals are not the only skills in the game. Going with an infinitely linear scaling system like this will still cause a few problems. Mainly with the damage dealing skills, such as the sticky bomb or the seeker mines, and the skills that have a 0 to 100% scaling that scales with skill power, such as the smart cover or the pulse. So now is the time to start looking at all of these other skills. And I'm going to begin with the pulse and the smart cover, because I believe that those are relatively the easiest to fix. The problem that comes with these skills is that on paper they should always be equally strong, but in reality they really aren't. That is because they multiply the stats that the player already has at any given point. In a perfect world, the smart cover should give 30% damage resilience to a fresh level 30 player that's spec'd into skill power, but then it should also give 30% damage resilience to a maxed out player in world tier 5 that's fully spec'd into skill power. If the damage resilience amount is lower or higher on either one of these characters, then it would be too weak or too strong relatively, since the only thing that it does is amplify the stats that you already have. However, we don't really live in a perfect world, and because the damage mitigation amount that comes with smart cover scales with skill power, and players get more and more skill power every time that they go up a world tier, the damage mitigation amount that comes with smart cover will only go up and up. The same goes of course for the stability, the accuracy, the pulse critical hit chance, the pulse critical hit damage, all the things that scale with percentages. And all those things, they get relatively stronger every time there is a gear score increase. This is different from the skills such as the heals, because if done right, yes, the heals will heal for more and more HP, but it will always be the same percentage amount of the average player's health, since with every gear score increase, the players also get more and more HP to begin with. Because of this, with the pulse and the smart cover, you will always end up with either one of two situations. Either the percentage values are balanced around players at the endgame, meaning that before players get there, these skills are significantly underwhelming compared to the rest because they cannot acquire the right amount of skill power and get those percentages high enough. Or we get the other situation, which is even worse, that these skills are completely broken at the endgame because they are so powerful, aka what happened in patch 1.3. Now I mentioned when I started talking about these things is that there is a very easy fix for this, which is to let these percentage-based values and the skill power needed to get them at those numbers, they have to scale with the world tier. We do not want to adjust the skill power scaling curve per world tier because it would make the heals, the shield's health, the damage from the turrets and all those things completely obsolete in lower world tiers. But what we can do is adjust how much these percentages on these specific skills scale with skill power in different world tiers, so that when someone commits into skill power at any given point in the game, he will always end up with a pulse or a smart cover that is of relatively equal strength. And honestly, that is all that is needed to fix this issue. For the Seeker Mines and the Sticky Bomb, however, those are a little bit more difficult to fix. Of course, we shouldn't forget that with armor out of the way, players are now free to pick up exotic damage resilience, which should help them against this type of thing. But I know that for many players, this will not be enough. And I agree, a player shouldn't have to rely on exotic damage resilience to survive against a one-shot sticky cheese or not. Now, in my opinion, the sticky bomb will always sit in either one of the two places in the game, at least the way that it currently is. The sticky bomb can either one-shot people, like it did in patch 1.2, and it is considered as completely overpowered, or it cannot one-shot those people, like in patch 1.5, and it is considered a useless skill for the most part. What I'm seeing here is that in either situation, the skill is not a lot of fun to play with or play against. So instead of trying to tweak the damage numbers just right to not piss off too many players, we should be taking a look at how we can make these skills fun again, fun to use, but also fun to play against. That is how we really fix these skills. The sticky bomb is a high damage area of effect burst ability, which is actually nothing original when you compare it to other games of similar genres. The thing that is so different about it in a Division, and the thing that makes it so annoying, is that there is no counterplay to it. Even in MOBA games, enemy players can usually see a small indication, in the form of a red circle on the ground, of where the enemy's area of effect abilities are going to land, and then players have a chance to step out of it, and possibly dodge all the damage. That is, of course, unless you're playing versus that piece of shit hero Chromie, but the point is that there is something you can do to avoid the damage, and that is exactly what the sticky bomb needs. It needs some sort of counterplay. So here's my proposed solution. Instead of that thing instantly exploding when you press the button to detonate it, why not have a 1 or 2 second red circle indication in the area of effect, similar to that of grenades, and have a little beeping sound just before it explodes. This way, it wouldn't really matter if it's actually able to one-shot people when somebody fully specs into skill power, because players still have a chance to get away from it, players still have a chance to dodge the blast. And good players that are using it can use it at choke points or when the enemy is stunned. But either way, it will not be such an easy press E to win button. This is also a solution that doesn't affect the PvE performance, apart from the fact that NPCs die 2 seconds later if you press the button to detonate it. As for the Seeker Mines, there is already some counterplay to them. By either shooting the mines, you can roll away from them at the right moment, or by shooting a sticky bomb flashbang at them to disrupt them, although that doesn't work on the multi-mine mod for some reason. But in my opinion, it really wouldn't hurt if these mines stay stopped on the ground and left a red circle indicator for about half a second to provide players with some extra time to react and roll away. All in all, what that leaves us with is with skills that are a lot more fun to play with, that can be fun to play against, and a skill power scaling amount that will be a lot more healthy for the game. Now the last thing that I have to say about the DPS is just a very small complaint, and it's a very similar complaint as well, and that is that the weapon damage rolls on gloves, such as assault rifle damage, shotgun damage and all those things, those should be percentage based as well instead of a flat base damage increase. The reason behind this is that the rolls on these gloves, they add a flat per bullet damage amount to each gun, which highly favors high fire rate weapons over anything else. This is of course because those weapons shoot more often, and thus you get the additional 1200 damage or whatever the amount is a lot more often. And I'm just saying, making all these things percentage based, that would solve a big part of that issue. The rolls would be just as efficient for every single weapon in the game, and I believe that the developers already know about this because they changed those things on the Lone Star and the Predator's Mark sets as well. When those sets released, they had flat base damage increases, but now they're percentage based. So please, let the weapon-specific damage type rolls on the gloves follow that same path as well. And that, guys, that is going to be it for the main stat and the stat rolls on gear. You can probably already tell by now why I had to split this up in multiple videos, as there's just so much to talk about, and I really want to go in depth as to why I believe that so many things are an issue in the game. If I decide to release another video like this, I will be going over the player and the build identification, or in other words, the ability for other players to see what build any other player is running, how tanky they are, how much damage they have, and all those things, just by looking at another player's health bar. I believe that this is also very important for competitive PvP, as unlike in MOBA games, you aren't playing with and against heroes whose abilities, strengths and weaknesses can be learned by experience. Everybody you meet can run with literally everything, and there are some very, very simple UI implementations that can be added to the game in order to let players know what they are up against in the blink of an eye. But I guess until then, let me know your thoughts on this video, let me know if you can see any pitfalls with all the ideas that I proposed, and as always, I will see you guys later, or like they say, in the Netherlands. See you later!